So I want to talk about, in terms of vessels and light and control, and related to basically opening to the challenge. We're starting to learn how to balance. What that means is walking the line, the edge. And this could feel like a tightrope. Wouldn't you be impressed if you saw someone walking on a tightrope? And concentration. This is about finding the rhythm and flow. Wouldn't you be impressed if you saw someone juggling? Focus. We use our senses to locate information. Wouldn't that be impressive if you saw somebody navigating blindfolded? So we've got to see that there's a version of us that is blindfolded, tightrope, juggling. And even when I see all this external, I go in, I say, what about this softness? My softness is precious. It's worth providing. It's worth protecting. And I think about it as what's kind, what's real, what's honest. And to me, that tzedakah is kindness. We learn that the world, in Jewish teachings, we learn in the culture that tzedakah is for kindness. It means charity. Tefillah is to be real, to be with Hashem, and to be genuine. Like you have no boundaries between you and Hashem. You become one. And then Torah is to be honest. You learn Torah. You learn how to tell the truth. You learn how to follow the truth. You learn how to be upright, not in denial. Right from wrong. Yes, no. I realized that in the times in the past when I was afraid to lose control, in other words, like let's say I'm going through a challenge and I was losing control, or in whatever it was, things like using sugar, even we would say weed, caffeine, sexually, resting, exercises, violence. These were all areas in which I felt like I could lose control because it was sort of like a challenge to find that balance. And no longer, so I decided there's like don'ts in my life. In terms of the fear of the uncertainty of the unknown, right? So don't ignore my worth, preciousness, because somebody else did. Don't throw myself away just because somebody else did. Don't stop approving of myself, loving me, choosing me, just because someone else did. And this I want to think of like the vessels and the light. And so first of all, like in terms of, backing up, like, so if I'm not going to throw myself away because someone else did, that means I don't have to start internalizing why I'm not compatible with them as a definition of my worth. They're not validating that I'm worthy by choosing me. By not choosing me, they're validating their choices, what their values are. So I had this positive feedback to somebody on desirable factors like health, first, second, and third person, like this idea that there's I, there's you, and then there's we or us, and that's a whole person. So you talk to somebody as a you, and as an I, and a we, and this is wholeness. And also this sense of extraordinary self-awareness, which is the willingness to like see oneself. And then in terms of a spectrum of everything from the warrior, the fighter, the wilde chaya, they say, the wild animal in Yiddish, the one that's the spirit, this wild spirit, and then on the other side you have like this monk, yogi, meditator, peacemaker, Zen princess or prince, and there's this power struggle of the wills, right? Like this will to win and control, and then this will to sort of like surrender and be like in flow. And so that's why the vessels and the light. So the masculine, which is like the output, performance, and the feminine, which is like the divine, sacred container. So we have like the vessel and the light. The ritual is like whether you approach from the outside or the inside. What do I mean? You have a man, his performance, it's vehicles, job, acquisition, degrees, clothes, muscles. He's very much showing his energy through these containers, but they're performative rituals. Versus a female, it's the outside container will be shrouded, chaos, dense, confusion, dark. The more divine, sacred it is, because this opacity, this substance, the shade is sort of like the outside. So for a woman, a ritual is a divine sacred container. And for a man, a ritual is like an output performance. And then I told this, by the way, so a lot of this inspired talking with a man named Kohn. So I told him in mid-May what's missing for me in 2025, and now we're in December, and just recently I told him again, it's still missing. Proactive about seeing me, spending time, using his phone to send love, free love without getting anything back, positive feedback, words of affirmation, encouragement, recognition. We might call this emotional support, emotional bolstering. Picking his battles, not always fault finding, and coming up with ideas for activities, taking initiative. It hasn't changed since mid-May, May to June, to July, to August, to September, to October, to November, to December. 7 months. So I've been telling him I don't want to stay in connection. Maintaining open contact for open connection actually feels like it's not appropriate when I can't see that my needs are being met and I'm being disabled from making a full connection with someone else. And I go to recovery meetings, and I wanted to share. So I was in one from OJR, Our Jewish Recovery. I attended a long time ago. And I was realizing, and I'm re-looking at this because I was looking at renegotiating my beliefs, that I don't believe anymore in being a scapegoat. And the truth is, I'm looking at this now, like, why do we need a victim hero, like suffering martyr? You know? So no more like victim hero, suffering martyr, right? I don't need to be, and no one else needs to be. And people can put whatever, like on a scapegoat, you can put whatever you don't want, whatever's yours that you don't want, onto the scapegoat. And then there's also this idea of the Leviathan, where you can come and take a bite out. So we don't want any more like predator, exploiter, which we call it, like a parasite. No more of that. Like the Leviathan is this idea that it's like this big whale and there's going to be enough for everybody to take a bite out of it. And it says that in the time of the Messiah, it will volunteer itself to be eaten by all the righteous. So the one that will give of itself to the righteous. But instead, people come, they're like trying to take what they want from somebody. Let's say you feel somebody's coming in, like they call it a vampire, right? Energy vampire. So no more of that. And this is also like, if you don't need it on the outside, then you have to look inside. Like, I can't martyr anybody, and I can't be a parasite to anybody. And then I start to recognize there's a version of myself that those processes helped me to cope with, which was my inner father, who I think of as like the fat hermit. Like seeing him, having him in me, not having to have that person outside who's abusive. That, in other words, like the father that was to me verbally abusive, like when he was absent in my life, then going and finding a new one to be outside, rather than recognizing I was carrying that version with me. And I was thinking also of like my friend Devorah, who passed away some years ago, that she, I didn't lose when she passed away, like a part that understands me and cares about me, and I understand her and care. Like that part actually became one, because we merged in that way. So it was like this I and I, like the small I and the big I. So there was a big I that recognized in Devorah the part of me, and that she and me. And there's a lot of different spiritual ways to look at this. There's identity that is not just a self-concept, a self-image, self-description, self-definition. And some people, they say like Rastafari, which is like Rosh Tiferet, the head of the crown, the head of the sun. And then there's like Jewish, which is Ani, which means I, and then Anochi, which is like the bigger I. And like in yoga and Sanskrit, they say there's the big I and the small I, like a capital I and a lowercase I. And I mentioned about projection and reflection in terms of seeing myself, parts of myself outside, and then filling in the blank from myself onto somebody, so I might receive and release what I directly sense and experience from what was like in the blank, and the blank is on the other person, and we like fill in the blank. And when I take that back and say it doesn't need to be on them, what if it belongs to me? So then you don't need addiction, distraction, which is the root of all the substance use, all the process, repetition, because you don't need something else. You don't need sitra achra, we call it, the other side of holiness. Holiness meaning wholeness, oneness. And you can welcome the one who has the urges, which is quoted from Jeff Foster. And then in Shaar Habitachon chapter 7, it's like a quote that says, I never did something other than what I was desiring in my heart. So this requires you to know your heart's true desire. Some people think, I desire to drink that soda, chas v'shalom, God forbid. But really, they don't realize that what they really desire is that pleasure. So like, if you would really give yourself the pleasure of fulfillment or of upliftment or of sweetness in life, then you wouldn't need those false desires. And this is like that non-duality where the I and I, you're saying the true desire is the oneness. The oneness means God is one. So it means the I that's God and God that is I therefore means I am God and God is me. Maybe the further I go from God in terms of getting lost in the world is how much of a separate self I'll feel, as we learn in Shaar Habitachon. It's the book, the portal of the gate of trust. But here we're talking about also from the Tanya. Well, I'm not quoting the Tanya. I won't say that's the source, but I'm saying we learn. There's a lot of sources. The Hasidic teachings of the Tanya teach us this. That as much as we surrender to the oneness, the more we'll be ourself, to be your real self, to be your real self. And Yoel bleier is a guy from my neighborhood. He said there's mekanim began Eden. There's jealousy in Garden of Eden. In heaven, each one is supposed to be spoon feeding each other. I learned, but he says there could be jealousy. In other words, somebody wouldn't want to share. They say, so he's saying sometimes people are suffering from that. Somehow jealousy got into the upper heaven. I don't know what to think. Maybe he's confused. And this idea of the tree of life is often also the tree of unknowing. And by eating from the tree of unknowing, we may have felt fear. I don't know. But the addiction to eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil didn't help us anyway. To need to know. And one last thing I want to share is you have 26 plus 1. And 26 is like a number we learned from Hashem. And then, 18. 26 is the number, it means one love in Hebrew. When you put the code together of the Hebrew letters, it means one love. It's also the 4-letter name of Hashem, which is the masculine, the feminine, and all the 4 worlds. And there's a lot of connect to the number 4. And there's a lot of representation, not for this video. And number 18, which is life, chai, right? So you have 1 times 18 plus 26. You would get 44, right? And then let's say you take that 26 and you do times 18. You get 468. Let's say you add one more 18. You get 486. So I feel like, looking at these numbers, we can start to see how there's patterns in our life, the literal mathematics of life, of love, of one love of life, like the one life, one love, that actually starts to change. And in this I and I, like the oneness in life, we start to be more fluid with our environment. We can cause much greater effects, and the inner self becomes one with the outer self, where everything sort of becomes one balanced mathematical equation. And that's all for today. All the best. Bye-bye.